All right, so the focus of our conversation today is not just social media. I want to take a step back to start out our conversation today and talk about the changing world of PR. It is amazing how much has changed in the world of PR since I started in the career 10 years ago. So I came out of the University of Texas, and my first job was with a literary publicity firm here in Austin, Texas. And when I got that job, my first role was as a book publicist. And back in 2003, pre-social media, before we just had this huge change in the way that PR and journalism is done, what happened was when I was given an author to promote, I was handed a 3-ring binder. So back then in a PR agency, we didn't get media contacts from a database or from a website. We really had these 3-ring binders that were passed around the office. So for example, if I had an author that was going to Denver for a book signing, my job was to get as much tour media as I could for that author. And so what I would do is I would thumb through this huge binder. I would find Denver. I'd go down to Drive Time Radio. I'd find the phone number, and I would sit there and I would call producers. And I would try to book Drive Time media in that market. When we had a producer leave, we whited out their name. We wrote in the next name. I mean, I'm talking dark ages of book PR. And so from that time to where we are today, it's just been dramatic how much has changed. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing work really well right now. So when I go out to writers' conferences, the word that I hear over and over and over again is the word you guys all know, it's platform, right? And the frustration that I have a lot of times when I hear advice given, and I'm sure you guys have, is there's almost an endless amount of things you could be doing with your time, right? Some people say to blog, some people say to get on Facebook, some people say to tweet, some people say write the book first and then get active. And so there are so many different things you could be doing. And at the same time, as an author today, you find yourself at the intersection of 3 industries that have been completely turned on their heads over the last 10 years, with journalism, PR, and book publishing. Okay, Esther did a great job of talking through how much has changed on the book publishing side. What I want to really dig into today is what has changed on the PR and journalism side. So I'm probably being a little bit ambitious here, and after our conversation today, I'm going to be out there and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have on Twitter, etc. I take a lot of ownership over people leaving a talk like this with a really clear plan. So if you look here, the goals that we have, I want to give you guys a really good understanding of where book PR is headed. I want to talk a little bit about interactive campaigns. How do you create an interactive campaign for your book? What does that mean? And hopefully give you guys some ideas on how you can do that for your book. I also want to talk a little bit about how to conduct an online brand audit and better shape your online platform. So the reality is, in today's environment, the first place that most publishers, media members, agents, influencers are going to interact with you and your brand is not going to be in person. Typically, it's going to be here on their phone, looking at your website, looking at your social media channels. And so I want to talk a little bit about how do you make the right kind of impression when they find you there. And the last thing is I want to talk with you guys about how you guys can start driving PR, start driving inbound publicity opportunities without necessarily working with a publicist or without necessarily having a book just yet. In this environment we're in today, there's so much that you guys can do directly to actually control inbound publicity opportunities. And so we're going to talk through some of that. So I mentioned when I started out in book PR, we're talking about the dark ages, and as somebody mentioned earlier, kind of the glory days of book publishing. Back in that time, what we would do is we would send most larger authors out on a big tour. You guys remember this, those of you that have been published a few times. You know, Ted would go out to 20 or 30 different cities and sit in a bookstore, and there would be great lines of people and lots of tour media, and newer authors were going out and doing that as well. So there's this big emphasis on getting authors out on the road and in front of people. There was also a heavy reliance at that time on book reviews. In other words, decisions and the power in the publishing industry in large part rested not only in pub boards or the editorial teams that were making decisions on which books to take on, but for us in the PR world, all of the power rested on those media members who were sitting there deciding which books to cover. If you think about that media environment, pre-social media, the way that I like to think about it is traditional media. So we had several traditional media outlets that almost all of us look to for our book suggestions. Oprah Winfrey, The Today Show, Good Morning America, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think about that media environment, in many ways, those major media outlets were up on stage. And we as the book-buying public were out in the audience. And if they didn't hold up a book, in other words, if they didn't talk about the book on Oprah or talk about it in their newspaper or talk about it on their radio show, it was really hard for us to hear about that book. We might find out about it at a dinner party or we might hear about it at church, but there wasn't this opportunity for us to connect in more of a social way online. And so if media didn't talk about it from the stage, we didn't hear about it. So where we are today is there are still traditional media up on stage. Good Morning America still has huge value. Associated Press, New York Times still have huge value. I would argue maybe more value than they've ever had before. But what's happening increasingly is major media is now looking out into the audience. So via social media, we're now passing notes back and forth. And what we're looking for, if I'm a traditional media outlet, is which notes are getting passed the most. So are people arguing over, is the dress orange or is it blue? And every major media outlet's going to talk about that today, or two escaped llamas running around. So they're looking to us now for what's of interest. And so the cool thing about that as an author is you don't have to start up here anymore. In other words, you don't have to be the one book that they hold up and talk about in the fourth hour on the Today Show. You don't have to be the one of 12 business books that are going to get reviewed in the New York Times this year to get your book out. You have this opportunity to start spreading it online. I want to talk about that today. There was also this intense focus. So book publicity, if you ask most publicists, book publicity can be a stressful job. All right, somebody has worked on a book for 5 years, and the book is getting ready to come out, and there's a lot of pressure that goes along with getting coverage for that book when it comes out, even today. So reverse to 10 years ago, when you had a 30-day window where the publisher shipped that book out to Barnes & Noble and Borders, and there were going to be 30 days where that book was up front on the front table. And if the media that you were going after for that book happened 60 days after pub or 90 days after pub, hey, thanks, Rusty, but all those books already came back. And so there was this 30-day window that we had. One of the best things that has happened not only to publishing as a whole, but to book PR, is not only do we have almost an infinite amount of time where you have shelf life for a book, particularly those of you that are novelists, but we also have a point of purchase in somebody's hand typically, 18 hours a day when they're not sleeping. Our old challenge as publicists was to coach an author through, okay, you got to mention the name of the book at least 7 times during the radio interview so somebody remembers the name of that book by the time they get to Barnes & Noble that night to buy it. And now they've got the point of purchase right there in their hands. There was also a heavy reliance on expensive, time-sensitive bookstore advertising. So in other words, you had to get out there and promote it right there during that period of time. The bigger thing that I want you guys to think about is at that time, before you guys had the ability to build an audience via a blog or a podcast, in many ways you had to either rent somebody else's platform by paying for advertising, or you had to get earned media and get invited up on their platform. So the way we think of it right now, we think we're in the age of micromedia. Everybody in this room, whether you think of yourself this way or not, you're a media outlet. Okay, you've got a certain amount of people that you influence with the blogs that you write, with Facebook posts that you write, with tweets that you write. There are a certain amount of people that are looking to you for entertaining and informative information. For some of you, that's just your friends and family right now. For others of you, that's 10 or 15 or 20,000 people. Okay? So what I want you guys to start doing is sort of thinking of yourself less like a marketer or less like an author and more like a media outlet or a journalist. Okay? So what has changed during this time? The media, for one. So Forrester Research did a study that said between the years 2000 and 2008, 1 in 4 media jobs disappeared. Okay, if you think about when that study was released in 2008, that's the leading edge of the recession that hopefully we're starting to come out of now. Most people put that number past half. And so if you think about that, in most newsrooms around the country, you have fewer people there that are now tasked with covering more stories than ever before. Okay? If you combine that with the huge volume of books that are now published every single day, you start to understand how crunched these journalists are in terms of their time. We went out to CNBC about a year ago to go see Gloria McDonough, who used to run the Bullish on Books section of CNBC.com. We said, Gloria, how many pitches do you get in a normal day? She said, most days I get more than 1,000. And I said, how do you go through all those pitches? What do you do? And she says, well, most of the time I'll scan it real quick for a publicist's name that I know, and if I don't see anything, I'll just bulk delete. Which I can't tell you how agonizing that is for us based on the amount of time that goes into writing those pitches. But for the most part, journalists today simply don't have time to keep up with the volume of pitches that are coming in. Michael Michelle, who used to be book review editor at the Dallas Morning News, said on most weeks he gets more than 500 books that arrive from publicists, from publishers, from authors. And the Dallas Morning News, unfortunately, like most major papers around the country, if you open it up on a Sunday, what you're finding is not book reviews typically that are written in Dallas or written in Austin. You might find one or two. What you're typically finding are book reviews that have been syndicated from the Washington Post or the New York Times or other major media. So again, that goes back to if you can get that major traditional coverage, it's syndicating further than it's ever syndicated before right now. Incredibly valuable. But the pain point for us is local media doesn't really exist anymore. Okay? Decisions are not made nearly as much at a local level as we think of traditional print, radio, or TV. So the challenge for us as publicists and for you all is how do we get the media a reason to find you? So what we're seeing right now from media based on the huge volume that's coming inbound, many of them are just putting up walls. So in other words, they're taking a bit of a don't call us, we'll call you approach to PR. And this second study backs that up. George Washington University and Cision did a study of journalists that said when researching stories, 89% of journalists turn to blogs. 65% turn to social networking sites, 52% turn to Twitter. So what's so interesting about this is for those of you in this room, in many ways right now, particularly as you're leading up to your book launch, Google can be a very good publicist for you. And so I want to talk through how we can make that work. The other big thing that has changed for you all, of course, is the buying experience. Esther mentioned on most statements she's seeing right now, 20% are bookstore sales, Barnes & Noble or Target or wherever it may be. So if you think about the way we buy books now, it's changed so dramatically. If I'm looking for a leadership book and I go to Amazon and I type in leadership books, 60,000 results come up. And so it used to be if I've written a leadership book and I'm in Barnes & Noble, at the very least I've got a chance of somebody just stumbling upon my book and buying it right there. Well, right now I'm one of 60,000 results that come up on Amazon. And so you cannot rely on that kind of luck when somebody gets to the retailer. The other thing that we used to do when we would send authors out on tour, the big focus was having that author get to know the bookstore manager and some of the salespeople at the bookstore. Because at that time, if I came in and I asked for a leadership book, me as the author, I want that person handing them my book. And so a big focus was get to know bookstore employees, let them hand sell your book. Well, where we are right now is micromedia, individuals, everybody in this room, and bloggers are the new hand sellers. If you think about the virtual bookstore, where we are right now, Amazon.com, what I want you to imagine is walking in the door of a bookstore where the aisles go as far as the eye can see, and the categories are as far as the eye can see. Okay? When I write about a book on my blog, when I interview an author on my podcast, when I tweet about a book, what I'm doing is I'm walking my audience through this virtual bookstore. I'm finding my book and I'm finding that book that I'm writing about, and I'm holding it up and I'm saying, guys, pay attention to this. And so if I walked 12 people over to that book, that's still a big deal. If I walked 10,000 people over who are downloading my podcast each week, that's a huge deal. Okay? So if we think about this idea of each of you as what I think of as a micromedia outlet, what I want you to visualize is when you start a blog, or when you start a podcast, or when you get on Twitter, in many ways what you're doing is you're taking the stage in your auditorium. Okay? And for some of you that are just getting started, you're talking from the stage. Maybe we've got the front row filled with friends and family, but there's a lot of open seats right now. Okay? One of the biggest mistakes that I see with authors as they get started is they come up on stage on their blog, or they come up on stage on Twitter or their podcast, and they focus almost entirely on their perspective on things. And we want to hear your perspective, but we don't know you're there yet, and we don't know to pay attention to your perspective. And so when you go on the air with NPR, what you're doing is you're walking out of the door of your auditorium and you're walking into NPR's. And when they invite you up on stage, I want you to imagine you're talking to an auditorium that's filled as far as the eye can see with a huge audience of people, okay? And they've invited you on stage and they've said, all right, talk with my audience. Tell us more about your book and your research or whatever the interview is about. What I want you guys to start thinking about is every interview you do, whether it's with NPR or local radio, or it's a speech, or you're doing a Q&A on a friend's blog, what they're doing is they're inviting you up on their platform and they're giving you a chance to reach their audience. Now, what most people do around a book launch campaign or around those kind of interviews is they go up and they give a great interview, and then they walk right out the door without any call to action. So what I want you guys to think about with that NPR interview, is there something that you can offer to that audience to have them following you out the door of that auditorium over into yours? So in other words, if, for example, so we ran a campaign, one of our big books of 2014 was a book called The Confidence Code. Came out Claire Shipman with ABC News and Good Morning America, and Caddy Kay with BBC World America. So Caddy and Claire had written one book called Womenomics. Big bestseller. Both of them are very well known. We knew going into that campaign they were going to get a ton of traditional media. They had all the relationships. I wish we could take credit for it, but they got everything. What they didn't have at that time was much of an online platform. So in other words, they were on a lot of other people's stages, but in their auditorium, they didn't own much of a connection directly with their audience. And so we said, all right, what can we create here? How can we give people a reason to head online? How can we give people a reason to follow them out the door to their site? And so we created a confidence assessment on the Confidence Code website. Pretty straightforward, right? What a lot of people want when they hear about a book like this, or when they hear about your book, is they want to personalize the message. So in other words, they want to immediately apply it in their lives. And so this confidence assessment allowed people to come in and figure out, all right, do I have low, medium, or high confidence? And what we would do is ahead of every interview, we would have the host take the assessment, and then we'd have Caddy and Claire talk them through the results. What you guys will find is media love the word free. So if you can offer a free assessment or a free workbook or a free download or a free ebook, they love to talk that up during an interview. And so what would happen is on certain interviews, Morning Joe was one, The Daily Show was another, our servers crashed on the traffic that was coming into that assessment, and we ran 130,000 people through that assessment in the 5 months around that book launch. And so now Caddy and Claire, in their auditorium with this email list, now own that connection to their audience. So as opposed to hoping that we can go reinvent the wheel with traditional media, they're now launching their next book into this huge audience. So what I want you guys to think about as it relates to your website, I want you to imagine you're doing an interview with NPR, okay? And during that interview, you were so entertaining that 1,000 people were interested enough to Google your name and head over to your website, all right? 1,000 people. Of those 1,000, 10% are ready to buy the book. Great. If you're like most authors, your website is set up as a very informational billboard type experience. Home, about the author, about the book, buy the book, sample the book. That's great if I'm ready to buy. Okay, you're giving me the ability to buy. So 100 of those people, if you have that kind of website, have bought. The other 900 people that are over there on your website were interested enough to Google you and to come to the site. They're not yet ready to buy. What they're looking for is more information on that topic, maybe an assessment, maybe a blog they can subscribe to, or a newsletter. Okay, so what's happened is those 900 people have hit your website, nothing for me to do, I'm out. Probably never be back again. Okay? Those 900 people have just walked into your auditorium. We've got to give them a reason to sit down and stick around. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Current state of book PR, very few traditional media targets left. I mentioned that to you guys. Everybody is pitching them. It's a broken process. Increasingly, what we're seeing at the highest levels of media is this kind of a don't call us, we'll call you approach to PR. What is working the best is a term that a guy named David Meerman Scott, who's written some very good books on this topic, coined newsjacking. So newsjacking is taking a story that is in the news and connecting it back to your message. Okay? And it's one of the most effective ways that you guys can start driving inbound publicity opportunities. I want to give you a couple quick examples of this. So we worked with a novelist, a guy named Sanjay Sangoi. Sanjay had a background in finance, but wrote thrillers that dealt with Wall Street and dealt with the world of finance. So Sanjay, this was at the time, a couple years ago, those of you from Austin remember this, Carl Icahn was battling Michael Dell for control of the Dell board. And Sanjay decided he was going to write a piece on the power of activist investing. Okay, that kind of a blog post, the power of activist investing, is what I think of as an evergreen blog post. In other words, it's a topic, typically, that's as relevant today as it's going to be a year or 2 or 3 years from now. It's a general, important but general topic. What he did when he saw that story is he said, okay, why don't I tie my general blog post to this very specific thing that's happening in the news? And so he titled it Carl Icahn and the Power of Activist Investing. Tailored the intro. The rest of it was a piece he could have written at any point that year. We got a call the next morning from a producer at Closing Bell with Maria Bartiromo, and that afternoon he was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange doing an interview with Maria Bartiromo on activist investing. I could have had a publicist pitching that producer for 30 days straight on the hour, every hour. We would have never gotten that interview. Okay? So what's happening right now is journalists increasingly are vetting authors online, but they're also looking for experts online. Okay? And many of you I know are novelists. Just because you're a novelist, it doesn't mean you don't have expertise on the topic area that you're writing on. Many of you who are writing fiction are writing fiction that connects back in some way with a life experience or with your area of expertise. So what I would encourage you to think about in this age of micromedia is the opportunity to also think not just like a novelist, but a bit like a nonfiction author. What we're also finding right now is you guys are spending 3-4 years writing a book, and then you come to us, and our job is to go out and get coverage, and what the media is saying is, yeah, that book looks great. I'll take 500 words from her on that topic. Or I'd love a blog post. So you guys are writing the book, and you're writing the coverage about the book right now. One of the scariest things for a lot of authors is when we tell them, we're going to need you to keep writing. We're going to need you to write timely, interesting pieces for us. So one of the things I want you guys to prepare yourselves for, those of you that are blogging already know this, it is a constant flow of content. And if you think about that analogy that I gave you about people coming into that auditorium, if you're not entertaining them on a consistent basis, they're gone. They're out the door. So the important thing here is thinking more like a media member than a marketer. So pre-social media, informational websites were just fine. People were there to learn more about you and your book. Now I want you to think about your website like a media property. Are you pulling people in? Are you giving them a reason to subscribe? Push marketing, we could pitch media, and there weren't as many people going after them. Now, the power of pull, as John Hagel puts it. We've got to give them a reason, not just to open our pitches and talk with publicists that they've worked with before, but the pull online is what we're seeing work really well. Traditional media, prior to where we are right now, ruled the world. Now we're in this era of micromedia. What we're seeing right now move books better than almost anything are podcasts. Those of you that listen to podcasts regularly know why. The podcasts that we listen to, we're very loyal to, typically. And so when that host talks about a book or interviews somebody, we pay a lot of attention to it. So smaller but more loyal audiences can be much more effective for many of you than what we might think of as perhaps more glamorous media. And then pre-social media, word of mouth took forever to take hold. We had to go to a lot of dinner parties or a lot of church events to hear about books. Now word of mouth, whether it's for this crazy dress thing, which I don't know how anybody doesn't think that's white and gold, but the crazy dress thing or the llamas or whatever it might be, things just, they take off quickly. So where should you start? For many of you, your brand is what Google says it is. So what I want you to think about is an online brand audit. How many people in here know what comes up on page 1 of Google on a search of your name? All right, so it looks like very few people. Here's what I want you to imagine. Imagine that I passed your name, not your card, but your name, to a reporter at the Dallas Morning News. And I said, you know what? Bill is perfect. He's a perfect expert for the story that you're working on. You should look him up. What I want you to think about is if a journalist is looking for you by name, if a literary agent is looking for you by name, or a publisher by name, can you be found? A lot of times what happens is results on page 1 may connect to you. So maybe it was, maybe there's a bio for your company that is showing up as one of the first couple results. Or maybe it is an old media hit that you had. What I want you guys to think about is how many page 1 results do you own? Is your website coming up, number 1? Is your Twitter account or your LinkedIn profile? Because for most journalists, if I'm on deadline, even if I'm looking for you by name, if I can't find you, I'm going to the next person. The other thing is, let's say I do find you. Let's say you've got your website there. Awesome. I click on that, and I go to your website. All I'm looking for is a way to get in touch with you today because I'm on deadline at 5 o'clock. Most authors, unfortunately, don't have one of the most important things on the website, which is a press room. Okay? I encourage you guys on your website, if you don't have a press room right now, add a press tab. There should be 3 sections of content on that press tab. The first is contact information. Okay? To request an interview or a review copy of my book, please contact, and at the very least, put your email address on there. Right below that, recent coverage. Okay? And if you've had recent coverage, list it there. What I think of as a journalist, if I land on your website and you've already been in Relevant, or you've already been in Christianity Today, or you've already written for HuffPost, what I'm thinking is, oh great, somebody else has already vetted him, and I can go right to asking you for an interview. Third section is downloads. You should have a high-res headshot, high-res book cover, your press kit. Make it as easy as possible on me to cover you. What happens is most people have a contact page, which is great, on their website, but what lives there is a contact form. All of us have seen these contact forms before. I don't know about you guys. When I fill out one of those, I don't expect to hear anything back. I don't know where those things go. But journalists, if they're on deadline, they're not going to trust that contact form. Most of them will click and go find another expert. Give them an email address that they can reach out to you on. Okay? That is the most basic level of discoverability. If I know your name, can I find you online right now? This is a key branding question for those of you who have a very general name. And by the way, I want you to build your brand online around your name as opposed to your book title. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen authors who have built a great website and a great blog on a website that is titled, the URL is their book title, and they build up this great year or two worth of value, but their next book is in a completely different area. And they've got to go reinvent the wheel there. What I want you guys to think about is your online platform. It's like laying bricks in a foundation. And when you have your author name as your brand, what you're able to do is you're able to lay bricks in a place where you can keep stacking in one place, as opposed to building a little house over here and then going over here and building another little house. Okay? A lot of times the other big mistake I see is somebody that will start a website here and then they'll have their blog over on Blogspot or WordPress or somewhere else that's off-site. Okay? Your blog needs to live on your website. It is the primary engine for you for new relationships. So responding to your audit, I know I'm running short on time, so I want to make sure we have time to talk about your website and your blog. Revise any and all channels that need updating. If you launched a blog 2 years ago and that thing's dead and decaying, take it down, please. If you've got an old YouTube video of an interview you did with Access TV 5 years ago, what I want you to ask yourself is, your publicist has gotten a journalist interested in interviewing you. When they're looking at your results online, they're looking for a reason not to book you. Okay? So if you've got something old, particularly video, take it down if it's not encouraging a booking as opposed to the opposite. Your website is your hub. How many people in this room own their first name, last name.com? So like rustyshelton.com. Awesome. Everybody in here that doesn't own your name as a website address, if it's available, please, when you leave here today or right on your smartphone, go ahead and grab that website address. Even if you don't want to start a website right now, just park it there. Okay, that real estate is incredibly valuable. If your name is taken, what I would encourage you guys to think about is rustyrshelton.com. And then what would happen is, from there forward, on my book cover, every interview that I did, Rusty R. Shelton is now my brand. If you think about the author I mentioned earlier, David Meerman Scott, his name's David Scott, but his brand is built as David Meerman Scott because that's where he's discoverable and everything's consistent. Those of you that are just getting started right now, it's so important that you try to be consistent across each different channel. So I would encourage you guys to grab that website address. I already have a website address for my 5-year-old son, his name. I parked that for him. My 7-year-old, his name was gone. It's a fun birthday present. I would encourage you guys to think about it for your kids. Park it. If you think about how valuable it is right now to us, you can imagine how valuable it's going to be for them in the future. This third one is so important. Are you pulling people in once they get to your website? This is the most important part of your online brand audit. When I walk in the door of your auditorium, is there anything for me to do other than buy something? What I encourage you guys to think about is to offer some kind of free value for people. Michael Hyatt, who wrote a book called Platform, does this so well on his website. When you get to his website, in the top right corner, there's a 3D cover of a book, and there's an opportunity to click there to download your free ebook. So for you all, I would encourage you to think about, can I create a quiz or an assessment, or can I create a great newsletter, or can I offer a free workbook for what I'm writing about? The key thing is, when I get to your website, I want something that's going to benefit me. In other words, I want something I can personalize. So workbooks, guidebooks, 30-day challenges, those are things that work really, really well. 3 levels to a reader's website experience. Information. Can I learn more about your book? Can I learn more about you? We talked about that. That's the most basic thing. The second thing, is it intriguing enough that I want to give you my email address? In other words, that I want to subscribe or bookmark your blog. Is the content intriguing enough that I want to do that? Third level, where very few people get, but it's where we see huge takeoff, are you inspiring me based on how good your content is to share it with my network, to walk my audience over and point to your site? That is what's so important there. What happens for those of you that are starting a blog right now is it's very, very important for you all to think about going up on stage. What I see the biggest mistake from most authors when they start their blog is it's like a newspaper filled with op-eds. So in other words, it's your perspective over and over and over again. Your book, it's your content, which is awesome, But again, you're on stage and nobody's here yet. Nobody knows to pay attention. So what we've got to do at the start, I would encourage you guys to think about a 3-part content strategy. Okay? First part is newsjacking, which is looking for opportunities in the broader news cycle to connect your message to what's going on. Pizza Hut yesterday, going back to this dress thing, sent out a tweet that said, clearly it's orange and white, and they had a picture of a pizza that was orange and white. So it's Oreo's tweet during the Super Bowl, you guys may remember, where the lights went out in the Superdome, and they said it's okay to dunk in the dark. They got tons of attention. So newsjacking can be a very, very effective tool for you guys. The second category is evergreen, which is this is where you're providing your perspective on things, or you're writing about the writing journey or things that you're up to. We want that to be about a third of it. This last category is so important. This is especially good for fiction authors in the room, those of you that are really looking to build relationships. What I would encourage you guys to think about is, think about your blog as if it's your newspaper. In other words, it's not just your perspective. You're reporting on the books, the events, the movies that are making the most headlines in your topic area. What I would encourage each of you guys to think about is an interview series on your blog, where once a week for a year, you bring in the key authors or the key experts in your topic area. You let them know, hey, I'm starting a spotlight series on my blog, and I'd love to interview you about your new book. We had an author that did this recently, a branding author, her first book, Denise Leon. And ahead of the book launch, for that whole year, we had her do brand book bites, which were reviews and interviews with authors of big branding books. And what happens is, each time she interviewed somebody, what she did is she invited them into her auditorium, she invited them up on her stage, and when that post runs, that author is pointing all of their audience in to her auditorium. Hey, go check out my interview here. So not only are you attracting the audience that you want to attract, more importantly, you're building goodwill with the key authors in your topic area. Now, I don't want you reviewing books or interviewing people that you don't think deserve the attention or don't have the quality that you would want to represent to your audience. But when you do that, Denise did that leading into her book launch, and what we had was this group of 50 people who, when the book launched, wanted to turn around and do the exact same thing for her. And so she had banked so much goodwill with those people. So when you guys think about social media, I want you to think about your blog and Twitter in particular as relationship building tools, and to think less like a marketer, less like an author, and much more like a journalist or a media outlet. You're really looking to build subscriptions. You're looking to build an ongoing connection with your audience. So other quick things to keep in mind, I want to wrap up in the next minute or so. How many of you are subscribed to Help a Reporter, HARO, or familiar with it? So one of my favorite inventions in PR in the last 10 years, if you go to helpareporter.com, a guy named Peter Shankman started this site. And what they do is they send out emails regularly throughout the week that are full of live media queries. So if I'm a journalist and I'm looking to talk to a cardiologist in the Austin area, then I would send to HARO, hey, I'm looking for a cardiologist in the Austin area that specializes in high blood pressure. I'm on deadline. So in other words, if this is you, I want you to pitch me. So what you guys can do with those emails every day is scan through and look for your topic area. What a journalist is basically saying is, if this is you, please pitch me because I'm looking for somebody with this expertise. I gave this talk in Boston at a Harvard event 2 years ago, and one of the people in the room had a pre-interview with Good Morning America the next week off of this one thing. So this is a great way for you guys to start getting exposure now. One of the biggest points that I want you guys to take away from this is, as you're working on your book right now is the time to start doing some of this. Now is the time to start building your audience. The book, what I encourage you to think about is the book is one piece of your ministry, one piece of your message. And some people are going to read that book and they're going to get a ton out of it. But a lot of people are looking for those blog posts, or they're looking for that podcast, and you can really impact their lives, like Sandy was talking about earlier today, a lot of times in different ways other than just the book. And this is a great way to do that. So I want to stop there and let you guys have your break, but I really appreciate your time this afternoon.